Welcome everybody. This is David Morgan from the Morgan Report, and today I'm doing an interview with Lynette Zhang. Lynette, you certainly have become very popular rather quickly, I would say, and you have, obviously, to me at least, a great depth of knowledge. So, we reached out and had a brief conversation a while back, and we've outlined some, I think, very important questions for our audiences. I look at this more as a conversation between you and I than a direct interview. So, me being a big picture thinker, and you as well, I think the biggest question I can ask to start this off is what is the biggest problem facing the United States right now? Is it financial?
Well, that is certainly part of it, a big part of it, because we need that money standard shift. But I think it's much bigger than that. And I'd like to say I'm really happy to be here today, too. But it's much bigger than that, because what I also see is technocracy creeping globally. And so I'm personally quite concerned about the governance of the citizens of the U.S., since that's where I live, but globally citizens. So I think that's got to be taken into consideration, absolutely.
Yeah, I would add on to that. I mean, if you asked me maybe 2 decades ago, I really believed at that time that financial freedom was basically freedom. And then later on, if you check some of my videos on my YouTube channel, I did this one, I forget the name of it, but it ended, I was giving some kudos to some of the younger people that are in our industry. And then I went on and said, but it doesn't really matter how much money you have, if it's real money even, if you've lost your freedom. Because
Right.
if you've lost your freedom, you've basically lost everything. And this is, I
Exactly.
think, what we face. And then, I don't want to go, I mean, we can go wherever you'd like. I don't want to focus too much on the very important periphery. It's not that it's periphery from an aspect of not importance, but from the aspect of my knowledge base and perhaps yours. But, the food chain, I mean, the GMO, that's a concern to me. You've got Fukushima that's hardly ever talked about. How bad is the Pacific Ocean? You've got stuff up in the air that some acknowledge and some deny. You've got, the spirituality. From my perspective,
Oh,
technocracy. We're both friends with Patrick Wood. In fact, Patrick used to live here in the Northwest, and I've had coffee with him several times. But, to me, it's what I call third force blind, which means that it's basically a creation that has no soul. And
oh,
this is
exactly.
extremely concerning to me. So I, again, just kind of want to touch on those since we're having this conversation. I don't want to take too much time there because I don't feel I am qualified on those topics, but I just want to let the audience know that, the idea that I had, again, 2 or 3 decades ago, that financial independence was independence. And if you had enough real money, the system hopefully becomes more humane, that you would be in good shape. I no longer believe that. I think that sound money alone is only part of the equation, but I still think it's important.
Exactly.
So let me ask you about how important do you place, our financial concerns with all these other things kind of in the back of our minds?
Well, I think you're right. It is really all part and parcel. But the shift is not just in the financial sector. However, I think if you have wealth outside of the system, like in physical gold and silver that has none of that counterparty risk, you can always convert it. And so then you have the ability to be more free. But you're right about the food source. I mean, I say, and I do for myself, you want to try and be as absolutely independent and self-sufficient inside of a community that you can, because the shift is happening in all areas. It's not just one area. And it is, if they feed you poorly so that you're not getting the proper nutrition, you can't think clearly. And if you can't think clearly, you can't pay attention clearly. And that actually supports a lot of the goals that seem to be out there. In a technocratic system, all of those assets, so food, water, energy specifically, and wealth is controlled. And then it's divvied out. I don't want somebody to divvy out my food, my water, my wealth. I don't want them to divvy it out. I don't want them to be the owner and be left high and dry, and my family left high and dry, and and actually all of us. I mean, that's a lot of the reason why I'm doing it.
Exactly. Well, I have listened to some of your interviews, not all of them, but many. So let's get a little more specific on the precious metals. I mean, I have a document for our members about how to use the Morgan report, but I want to ask you, how do you allocate what you do for, say, somebody that's like 25, graduated from college, just started a savings program, versus, let's say, a 50-year-old business owner, man or woman, that's already got some assets? How do you approach that?
Well, I think I probably approach it very differently than most other people do, because for me, I've made the full paradigm shift, and I no longer put value in dollars. And we're trained to do that. And so people think, oh, silver's going up or gold is going up, and that's why you buy it, and that goes to the allocation, et cetera, et cetera. And because dollars have no value until you convert them into something, when I get dollars in my hand, I convert. Now, the difference between, typically anyway, the difference between a 25-year-old and a 50-year-old is the level of wealth that they have to work with. So what we do here, and actually what I did, I mean, I know it seems like I came out of nowhere, but I've actually been in this industry. I'm 63, so, it's an overnight success that took 53 years to get here, because I've actually been working on this on some level in different areas since I was about 10. It's just now I'm getting acknowledged, which is awesome. But, having lived inside of this system, I could, and I have my whole life, I could tell you that it was probably only 7 or 8 years ago that I actually had the full paradigm shift. So I've been studying currencies since '87, and what I see are patterns. And so when I'm allocating a portfolio, or any of us here, because we all execute the strategy, it's based upon the client goals, what they have to work. When the first thing we do is map everything out. Okay, what are your goals? What are you really trying to accomplish? What is your current cost of living? What issues are you facing? What's your fixed rate debt load? Get rid of that variable rate debt, because in this climate, that'll kill you. So, but fixed rate debt is handleable. And so when I'm looking at an allocation, the first thing I always look at is, what are you trying to accomplish, regardless of your age? And then, what is your circumstance? What do we have to work with? And once we have that roadmap laid out, then quite honestly, it's very easy to see, well, you need barterable silver, you need barterable gold. This is how much growth gold you need for this function or that function or the other function. So I'll use percentages in terms of my barterability, so much silver to so much gold. But my allocation would be absolutely based upon what their goals are and what they have to work with. I mean, if you're coming in with $1,000, you're certainly not going to buy, say, a $6,000 numismatic coin. And that might not be appropriate for you anyway. But, if you're coming in with $1 million, 10 million, or something like that, there are different issues that we would have to deal with. And so that's really the way that we all approach it here.
Okay, very good. So one of the questions I get, in fact, I know you've been interviewed by Greg Hunter as well as myself. And, Greg asked me some time ago, pre-interview, what's it going to look like? And I actually put up a video for all of the viewers of that interview, and it was a documentary. It wasn't a docudrama. It was an actual documentary on what happened in the currency crisis of 2000 in Argentina. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a pretty good preview of the potential disruption that would take place, let's say, in the U.S. if there was a dollar failure. So I'll flip it and ask you, Lynette, what do you think it will look like as we have quote unquote a collapse? I believe we're collapsing,
right?
Or let's say further destruction of the U.S. dollar's hegemony in the world's currency markets. What do you think it's going to look like?
Well, first of all, I think the example that you used is absolutely perfect. And there are lots more that look exactly like that. So that's one of the repeatable patterns that we talk about. And in fact, I'm going to be doing that for this country because people think it never happened in the U.S., when in reality, prior to 1913, it happened 3 times. Because that's typically what happens when a government needs to fund a war. They went off the gold standard, they hyperinflated the currency. Then, of course, it crashed because there was no real value in it. And then they went back on the gold standard. And prior to 1913, typically, well, a central bank had a charter, 15 to 20 years normally. And so it's really interesting when you look at the coordinated wars and the coordinated hyperinflation. What we don't realize, what everybody's really looking for is when is it going to be obvious to me, because we've lost 98% of our purchasing power. I don't know. I think that's a collapse, don't you?
Yeah, I'd make that same point.
Exactly. But because they want it to happen at 2% a year so you don't notice that that's happening, you go, well, when is it ever going to happen? By the time we see it, it's too late. So typically, there are things that surround every single money standard shift. Number one, and it always involves a tremendous amount of chaos. And some of us that are watching this, if you lived through 71, you lived through a money standard shift. And what was happening that period of time? You had the Vietnam War, you had all the protests. My sister was billy clubbed at Kent State, and others were killed. Remember that? Like, I think
absolutely.
there were 4 students that actually were killed.
Yeah, Buffalo, Springfield, something's happening here. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to get that out. Go ahead.
Totally, and I'm getting goosebumps. I mean, and do you remember the energy that was in the air? It was like you could feel.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're about the same age. I'll let the audience decide who's older. But anyway.
Well, I don't hide it. I'm kind of proud of it, actually. And there's something about being around for this long means that, yeah, I remember 1971. And I remember civil rights and women's lib. I mean, my parents, my father was a developer, and they worked out of their house. And don't ask me why I remember this, but I always remembered it. Because I would have to take care of people if my parents weren't ready to deal with them. And I remember I was standing in the doorway, and they had just talked to this nice young couple that he worked for IBM. And I remember my mother pounding her fist on the table and saying, "He's a comer. He's a comer. He makes $12,000 a year." Mm-hmm. Now, back then, the average income was what, $7,100, $8,000, something like that. So,
sure.
If he was an engineer with IBM, he made $12,000 a year. He could afford a nice house, but a family of 4 was living on the average income too, right? Exactly. Women's lib took the women out of the household and it goes back to your first question, started to disintegrate the family, right? This was all intentional because we went from a savings-based currency, at least partially, to a fully debt-based currency. So the stock market imploded 45%. Inflation exploded officially 37%. You had all of those protests, and yet who knew? I mean, I sure didn't know that the dollar bill that I had in my wallet in July of 1971 was a different dollar that I had in my pocket in September of 1971, because now it was based on debt. And the most important part of that, and this is the piece, people say, well, Nixon took us off the gold standard, and it seems like not really a big deal, but the effect of that was that he handed over full control of inflation to central banks who know debt and leverage.
Exactly. So let's move on to where you see us on the, let's say, gold and silver. Let's just stay specific to that over the next, say, 5 years. Do you see like a massive leg up? Do you see a flat market? What do you see?
Well, actually, what I see, since you gave me that window of 5 years, these markets are so fragile that, and, with all of the leverage in the banking system, these markets cannot drop more than 3.57%. And that's according to the Treasury, because that's Morgan Stanley's leverage ratio. And so what that means is that once they drop 3.58%, Morgan Stanley is insolvent. And since the fiat instruments that they hold are tied to everybody else, once that happens, and Deutsche Bank is, I think, 1% more than that. So once that happens, we have a domino effect. So I don't really think that they can keep this, nor do I think they want to keep this going for another 5 years. I think that they want to keep it going until they work out the blockchain technology so they can shift us and get us to volunteer to go hold all of our wealth, or at least have the monetary base in cyberspace, which then they control with a button push. So within 5 years, I think we'll see the reset. And the way that the official reset looks is they revalue, in this country, dollars against gold, and that's really an overnight revaluation. Not saying the markets won't force the revaluation like they're doing in Venezuela now, but I think right now the fundamental value of an ounce of gold is north of 95, conservatively, north of $9,500, and silver is north of $637. And I think that we will see that and more, because the more debt they grow, the more derivatives they grow, the higher that nominal number, doesn't reflect value, it's just a nominal number, will go. So, I mean, this will sound outrageous, but it would not surprise me to see gold at trillions, $87 trillion an ounce, like it did in Weimar, Germany, right? But you won't be able to buy anything with those dollars at that point. So yeah, that's what I think will happen within 5 years. Okay.
I'll chime in or add on a bit. So I sent you both the, two of the three books that I'm involved with, the Silver Manifesto and Second Chance. In the Second Chance, I mean, the whole premise of that book is that 90% of the move comes in the last 10% of the time. I do believe that's ahead of us. I do think we're going to see astronomical paper prices, but we really don't want to pay a lot of attention to the price. I know everyone quotes it, and what's the price, and what price is it going to be, and then it goes. What you really want is what is the value going to be determined by the market. And I use a very corny example, but I think hits home, because almost everybody that's ever been involved, even at a very cursory level, says, bet 8 ounce of gold buys a fine men's suit. Everyone has heard that. And so I just add on to that. I go, if that ounce of gold buys a Men's Warehouse clothing store, I would suggest that gold is overvalued. And all markets, including the precious metals, go from undervalued to fair value to overvalued. We're very, very much undervalued. So I see great things ahead for the metals as far as what their value is determined to be by the marketplace, regardless of what goes on in the management of those prices currently. I have a whole chapter in the Silver Manifesto about silver price manipulation, and it's, I don't know. Did you have a chance to read that chapter?
I did, yes, and we are definitely simpatico.
Yeah, I'm pretty, I mean, that's not like Econ 101. I had some criticism on, Amazon, and I can take it. I mean, but, when someone has the gall to say that, and they read, what the Sharpe ratio is, and I built on the work of Adrian Douglas. I mean, this is not Econ 101 that we're talking about in that chapter, but I tried to, I probably rewrote that 6 times to try to make it sufficiently apparent to any lay person without having any finance or economics background,
quest.
what it really meant. Well, thank you. Sorry to make this too much about me. So
Oh,
moving
no,
on.
no. I mean, you and I, that's my mission, is to translate this financial noise into understandable language. And I mean, I've been working on that for many years. But I would like to also add to that, that goes back to when you were asking me about the allocation. I don't care what it does in nominal terms. I mean, if you had a $20 bill 20 years ago and you've got one today, nominally they're identical. But what you could buy with it 20 years ago and what you can buy with that $20 bills today in terms of value is vastly different. And I should probably redo this study. Maybe I will, because I did this a while ago. But I took a look at what happens to all asset classes during money standard shifts. So I could tell you that globally on average, and you were talking about, Men's Warehouse, but globally on average, 25 ounces of gold or the equivalent would buy an entire city block, buildings and all. Because right now what's in them is just a whole, in the stock market and the bond, I mean, there's just a whole bunch of, they say, ooh, if we keep interest rates low, it might create bubbles. Are you freaking kidding me? I mean, pardon my language. But you see what I'm saying? I mean, that's just stupid. It's all a huge bubble, but a rising gold price is an indication of a failing currency. So, you take advantage of these trends. You can see what the insiders are doing if you know where to look, right?
Sure.
And when they start to accumulate the Men's Warehouse, that's when you start to accumulate the Men's Warehouse.
Okay, well, I'm going to shift us to what it potentially looks like. And, I read a lot, as well do you, but one thing that's come up quite a bit over the last, I'm going to guess, couple of years or so has been, where is the next step? What is the reset? And part of that equation has been the SDR, the special drawing rights. And this, of course, when you inflate vis-a-vis a national currency like the US dollar or even the euro, you've got the population base. I mean, the whole idea of the full faith and credit of the United States means the ability of the government to force you to pay good on their debts that you didn't really get to vote on, even though we have a purported, republic, let alone a democracy. We have neither. But the point is, what do you think about the SDR? You think it's viable? Think it's going to happen? What do you think?
Well, I'll go 99.999% yes. So I'll take a little fudge room, but honestly, I'd say 100%. I've been watching the SDR for a long time. I mean, it's been around since '69. They created the mechanisms to position it as the world reserve currency at that time. But then Kissinger created the petrodollar. But that system is now failing. They didn't get rid of anything. They just let everything rest. And they started dusting it off and transitioning the SDR to take over. China first brought it up in 2009. And, if you'd been talking to me before that, I would have said, well, it could be called the Hoochie Gooch. It doesn't matter. It's just a name. That's all it is. But they made very sure that the SDR, and they say it all over their website, it's not a claim against anything.
Right.
Right? Rather...
Yeah, that's my point. Yeah, if I could interject.
Please.
It's, when you got the full faith and credit of the U.S. means basically we force you to back this up. When it becomes an SDR, it's the banks among themselves. There's nothing. It's all hyperbole. It means zero.
Right.
So they could inflate to whatever, and as long as they have control of it, I mean, the old adage, he who owns the gold makes the rules, or he who controls the money that we say it is, and forcibly so, determines what the rules are.
Right.
So,
and
or how it's dispersed, or who gets it, or all that
Exactly. Stuff. And see, a big problem for the central banks is that when they make a policy decision, the lag time between decision and where they can determine whether or not it had the effect that they want is right now running about 17, 18 months. Well, that's not good. Once, as you stated, once it's push button in one place, guess what? They want you to shop. All they have to do is make sure that you cannot hold your principal in cash, and that, you know, they make a big enough difference. There are no limitations to how low they can push interest rates. In other words, steal how quickly and obviously they can steal your principal once everything is digitized. And that's the other thing about the SDR. In 2011, the IMF came out with a report which was in essence their plan for how they would roll the SDR out to the world. There's a substitution fund, so it's really easy to convert dollars under their control, to convert excess dollars that are no longer used or needed in the financial system into SDR debt. But part of what they want is they want global assets valued in terms of SDR. And thanks to China's blockchain coin, that's begun. I've not seen, I get a lot of criticism for this, but quite frankly, here, I'm going to put it out there again. If anybody else knows of a cryptocurrency that, when married to blockchain or married to anything else, becomes an SDR, please let me know, because I can't find one. That one does. And its sole goal, according to what they've said, is to hold title to all physical assets, everything, so that that can be traded globally. And you can use the equity in your house because it's in a fractional coin. So you could go shopping at the mall. I mean, you know, so yes, I think it'll be the SDR. I think the technocrats at the IMF, because that's what they are, they're all technocrats, none of them are elected, and they're above the country, they're above the laws of every country. They don't pay taxes anywhere either. But yeah, I think the SDR is the one that's been chosen, and China's been chosen to spearhead it because they're an absolute technocracy. So everybody has to do what they say. So yeah, I mean, have you read anything about that or?
Oh yeah, I try to stay on top of everything that affects the economy at large. I consider myself to be a rather big picture thinker. That's why some of these questions you probably haven't had in other interviews. I'm not sure. As I said, I didn't see all of the interviews. So that leads to the next question I had teed up, which is about the cryptocurrencies. And let me just preface it with, we've both taken our share of criticism. And just as for me to feel better, I'm not a real feely guy, but I am a thinker. You can attack the idea, you can attack the principle or whatever, but don't attack the person. And ad hominem, just shows the other side to be immature, in my view. I mean, if people don't like my height or my whatever, keep it to yourself when it comes into these public forums like this. I mean, we get our comments in the comment section. In most cases, I let them ride because if I purport to be, free market, but when it gets into the F-bombs or whatever, right, then Philippines guy usually just takes them out. He speaks good enough English to take those out. And, if they get persistent, they block somebody. But I want to be free market, but it just detracts from the other readers of the comments, I think. And I don't try to slant it, just pro David had a great interview. Anyway, again, back to you. So this melding of the SDR with the cryptocurrency, and I admit, I'm still working on understanding more about it and seeing the long-term, viability of it. I certainly know enough about the blockchain to think it certainly has its place, but like a lot of things in the human endeavor, it's not so much the entity itself, it's how it's used. Right. I mean, you can use a knife to cut up a steak and have the best barbecue in your backyard you ever had, or it could be an implement to hurt somebody, So in that context, where do you see this crypto SDR meld and cryptos in general going?
Well, I used to say that I'm not an expert in it, and I am not an engineer, but it has been, having studied central banks and the financial system and Wall Street and all these things for all these years, what I know is that they intentionally make things complicated because nobody questions it. And so the fact that you, as an extraordinarily intelligent human being, and me as an extraordinarily intelligent human being, that we can't, get down to the base of this, tells me that it is intentionally complicated. And even those that choose to distract, come to me with facts, okay? If I'm wrong, I have no problem. My nickname is Data Gal. So you show me the evidence, I will do my due diligence, and yes, indeed, I can change my opinion based on the facts. And again, I haven't seen anybody else I've seen lots of critics, but nobody's come and said, you know what, there's all these other cryptocurrencies that marry and become into whatever other cryptocurrency and become an SDR, because it does not exist. So I agree with you 100%. I can see the advantage of it, but I also read all of those IMF, BIS, World Bank. I read all of these documents all of the time. And what they always talk about doing is introducing change from a distance and then controlling it. And hey, look at Bitcoin's making new highs. Oh yeah, that's right. The CME group is granting it a derivative product. Well, Bitcoin is a derivative of money. I mean, it's an algorithm which costs zero, right? So they're bringing it mainstream, and yet the people that adopted it early, okay, they're making lots of fiat dollars. Well, that's how they always do the shift. In 1913, they kept the barter ratio the same, so the average income way more than doubled. So what did people care if it cost them a little bit more to live? They didn't care, and we had the Roaring 20s. Same thing happened in the shift in the 70s, and guess what? The 1980s with the dynasty and greed is good and Gordon Gekko and all of that. That was our 1920s. And so now they've got these cryptocurrencies, and they're insane. It's gone up, 500% in terms of fiat in a year, and that has value. So it's a bubble, and they will control it. The central bankers, they've controlled money for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're not going to say, oh, yeah, it's your turn now. And how outside of the system is it really? I mean, come on, guys, open your eyes. So yes, I could see the good of it, but I also know their intention because I read their documents, and it's not for our best interest. There's no limitations. It's in Breaking Below the Lower Zero Bound, the IMF report that came out in 2015. Read it. It's an easy read. You'll see it for yourself. Once we have everybody, we get rid of cash, everything's in cyberspace. There are no limitations to how low we can push interest. They've already gotten our purchasing power. They want the rest of our wealth. And putting title in cryptocurrencies that can be traded globally, you out of your mind when you agree to that. But something will happen that you don't understand what you're doing. You're not reading those smart contracts, because who reads a contract anyway, let alone a crypto contract, and then we're all slaves. We have no wealth. That's what technocracy is. All wealth, all property, all food, all water, all everything is held in trust and controlled by unelected officials at the top that dictates what you get to have, or I get to have, or all of us get to have. So I wish I didn't feel this way, because I have grandbabies and I have children. I mean, how much longer? I'm in the last third of my life. I didn't think I would see this level of change by now, but yeah, so that's how I feel about it, and no, I'm not an engineer, and so I can't go in and read the code, but I am an expert on central banks. Absolutely. I am an expert on the SDR. Absolutely. And so, yeah, I think I am an expert on some level, not an engineering level, but on an economic level, I have jumped in that pool constantly for so long, yeah, I know a lot about it. I don't like it. If there is a balance, I'm good with that. But that's not what they want. They don't want a balance.
There's so many directions I could go, and I'm certainly not an apologist for Bitcoin. I mean, I am free market. I'll leave it there. But where I'd like to go with it is actually more on the philosophical side. Did you see the movie The Circle with Tom Hanks by any chance?
I did not see that.
Okay, well, I'll give you a brief outline. So basically, it's a surveillance state, and everybody's working at this company, which is probably a pretty good metaphor for Google. And everybody's transparent as can be. In fact, one of the new hires is just, doing a beaming job. And so she elects to, or is selected to, have a video camera basically on her 24/7. And she's got all these new friends, at the company, and then there's these followers and all the stuff that's, basically current right now. So she starts to question some of this and, what it all means, and she does really cherish some privacy. So at the end, near the end of the movie, she basically flips the table and says, hey, it's such a great idea to be so transparent, and puts the cameras on the two leaders, which are Tom Hanks and I forget the other actor's name. So this is my question. Well, if you have nothing to hide, what's the problem with, the surveillance state? Well, if they have nothing to hide, what's the problem with them not showing everything above board, right? I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, again, showing my age, but it's true. And that's what made this republic so awesome from a philosophical, fundamental perspective going back into ancient history, was that all men are created equal. They intended women, I believe. Right. Anyway, regardless, I don't want to get into semantics too much. But everyone was equal under the law, which means that the government was as equal as a citizen. In fact, really the intent was that there was nothing you could get higher than citizen.
Right.
The president of the United States worked for the citizenry. That's how it was intended. Right. But I don't want to go too big on a rant here, but I think I want to make this very important point that with technocracy, it's a very much us versus them, except the us is whatever it is, 99.26% of the population, and the 0.72% is basically as black as it gets. Yes. It's and from my perspective, probably as evil as it gets. And it's I forget the word, but it's not technocracy. It's CACA. I think it's coptocracy or something, where it's the rule by the most inept, corrupt, available types. Sociopaths on steroids. I mean, and this is kind of the way I see it. Me, I'm pretty outspoken as well as I know you are. So I'd like your comment. I'd just like your comment on that. I guess I want to add, is there a way out? In other words, do we, as a metaphor, put the camera back on these people? You and I are shedding some light on it, but a lot of people blow it off. Oh, David doesn't like Bitcoin. I don't like him anymore. I'm not saying I don't like it. I'm saying if you like it, go for it. I'm saying, in fact, I doubled my Bitcoin account here recently, right? I have some because I'm aligned with someone in Mexico that translates the Morgan Report into Spanish. And some of the payment came through in Bitcoin. I set up a wallet. I have it. I don't refuse it. It's payment. And the thing doubled in the last, couple of months. Right. So am I complaining? No. Not really. Do I think it's sound money? No, it's not. I'll make that argument all day. Anyway, I'm on a tangent. Bring me back. What do you think about the surveillance state and what can be done about it?
Well, first of all, awareness is the first part, because if they know that we're paying attention to it, then it's not as easy for them to pull off. There's so many interesting things that are happening in that. And going back to Patrick, he pays a lot of attention to the Agenda 2030 from the UN that is wanting a full surveillance state. And, I just read an article yesterday in LA where there were massive protests about the police department testing drones over the city, and they really didn't listen. But the reality is that there are more of us than there are of them, and we vote with our pocketbook. And so a big part of what I've been doing myself, And it's been an interesting process and shift for me, and I should probably write more of this down, how I'm feeling when I do it. But number one, personally, I've been using a lot more cash, because every time you use that debit or credit card, the bank gets paid and your level of comfort is reinforced, which is exactly what they want. So I would rather go to my farmer's market or go to a local shop, shop locally. I'm definitely a locavore. If I have a choice between, a chain store and my local mom and pop, if it costs me a little bit more, I don't care, because that money stays in the community. So, we can start taking back some of our privacy as well. I mean, this is part of the technology where, like my children in their 30s, it's probably more toward the millennials, where, they post everything. Everything is about, me, 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 me. So we need to figure out a way. So this is my current quest. Figure out a way to communicate with the generation and younger about the importance of privacy, so that we don't just willingly hand it over. It isn't, well, why should you care if you have nothing to hide? That has nothing to do with it. That's the argument. And then you go, well, oh yeah, okay, I've got nothing to hide. I like my privacy. I like to be able to go home at night and close my door. And if I don't do this, but if I wanted to run around my house naked, I want to be able to do that.
Sure.
I want the choice and the privacy that I can afford if I'm using cash outside of the system, or, dare I say it, because I definitely do use this occasionally, gold and silver outside of the system as a tool of barter. Okay. That's where you're going to have your privacy. So take it back and stop giving up all of your information. I was doing research and I came across this site, which it was a government site, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because it totally creeped me out. But I thought, well, okay, I'll sign up so they send me stuff. And when I saw the questions that they were asking me once they knew I was private, I thought, no flipping way on God's green earth am I going to give them that information. But Google is anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
It's a balancing act. And you do know that a robot was just given citizenship, because you started out by talking about that, in Saudi Arabia.
I saw
or
that.
Dubai,
Yeah.
it was Saudi Arabia. So
right.
A robot with a female robot with artificial intelligence has more rights than a lot of citizens or people that live and have lived in Saudi Arabia for many, many years. And the Eurozone, when I saw that, I went like, oh my God. And so I did a little bit of digging. I have more to do. But they've been discussing the same thing, robot rights in the Eurozone. And I'll bet you here too, but I haven't gone that far with it yet. But I mean, that's mind-blowing. They're giving, corporations have more rights than citizens do. Corporate sovereignty. Google, Facebook, Amazon. I mean, they have the field, Apple. The playing field is not level. And that's because it benefits those that are really in charge, which is not really the governments. It's really the corporations.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I really hate to say that. I just did a piece on that recently.
Oh, it's true.
It's true.
I'll be showing a chart on that. I'm speaking in Australia next week, and that's one of the many charts I'll be showing on the screen. But back to you. So I would, I don't know if you're familiar with Max Egan, but he's a deep thinker. He does lectures all over the world, and he continually says, start using cash. I agree with him. I do quite often. It does slow up the system. It's a small way you can throw a wrench into the gears. And it is their fiat. I mean, look at, I'm going to digress a moment, but everyone talks about Well, it's so common knowledge now. I mean, when I started and said the Federal Reserve was a private corporation, I used to get, metaphorically the eggs thrown at me because everyone knew it was a branch of the government. And of course, now almost anybody on the internet knows that's not true. It is a private corporation. But people would argue about, well, I went to the Washington, D.C. and I saw the Treasury printing the bills, the paper. And it's true. The Treasury's on contract with the Fed to print it, and they pay what it costs. They pay 3 cents for a $1 bill or 3 cents for a $100 bill. It doesn't matter to them. It's the same amount of ink and paper. They pay cost, 3 cents, regardless, and then they load it at face value plus interest. It's a pretty good racket if you can get it. And, so anyway, I digress. I'm going to leave it there. Lynette, it's been a pleasure. We could go on and on. I'm sure we'll probably have to do a follow-up here once we get all the positive and negative comments. But as we close out, can you just give your contact points for anybody that's interested in working with ITM Trading?
Absolutely, because we really do all work very closely as a team. So you can get a hold of us. Our site is itmtrading.com. We're also, I have the YouTube. We have the YouTube, and I publish at least 3 times a week on that, different, like today's insider trading. So I'm showing you what the insiders do, and that's YouTube //ITM Trading. And then, of course, they can call us at 888-696-4653. And our approach is quite different than the typical out there, but it is based upon repeatable patterns and absolute data and facts. And I encourage everybody to do their own due diligence. Don't take my word for it. Don't take your word for it. But, do your own due diligence, put a little skin in the game, and you'll see. Because when you look at things just a little differently, it's always amazing at what you see.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for giving me your time. I hope this is beneficial to at least some of our viewers. Yeah. And again, I think, after a few months, we can probably revisit this and maybe have a checkup on if the SDR is popping up more and more in the financial press or not.
Yep. I think that's a great idea. I'd love to do it. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Bye. Okay, so I don't know how to turn this off.
I don't either. I just know how to hang up. So I guess I'll let your guy go.
Yeah, everybody left me. It's just you and me, but that's okay because I think he can chop this piece off.
Well, thanks. Okay, well, my butt's getting a little sore. I will let it there. I'll probably, what I need to do probably is buy some minor amount from you so I can get on your mailing list, or can you just put me on your mailing list?
I can just put you on the list. I have your email address, so.
Yeah, no, I'm always learning more.
That's constant, isn't it?
Oh, well, it makes life interesting.
Yes, it does.
I mean, that's what I told my girls, you're going to have 5. Look at your dad. He's had a few different careers doing my passion now, thank you God. But, I started off as an engineer, and I was going to go on that. But I think I balanced this. I've made this pretty much about us, not all about me. I do like my topic, but I'm with you. I mean, I was going to interject if I couldn't remember the saying. But it's a big people talk about ideas and ideals. Average people talk about blank, I can't remember it. And small people talk about themselves.
Oh.
And that was coming back to all the kids are about I, self, me, a selfie, me, I. And I forgot the middle one, I would have interjected it. But big people like you and I, not that we're better than, but we're mature adults. I talk about these concepts. I want to know about what you think about the SDR. I don't care what coffee brand you had this morning.
Right.
You know what I mean? But they do.
But see, part of that is if you're all about me, you are not paying attention to them. So
absolutely.
I have this toy and I could put things on my face and it's magically worth, what was it, 42 billion Snapchat when it came out. I did the whole thing on it and it had $500 million in losses. And this is really reminiscent of 99 when there's no earnings, but this company is now valued here. And, it's just amazing. It's amazing that it has evolved to this and people are blind. I don't want to miss the run. Well, the insiders are getting out. That's what always happens. But yeah, I'm always happy to have a conversation, because the more people that hear this, maybe they'll make a choice that can at least protect them a little bit.